Hey guys, Dave Moore at DaveMoore.com, talking today about mounting rifle scopes. Believe it or not, there is a proper way to do this to ensure that you get the most accuracy out of your scope. So I figured I would do a how-to guide on the proper way to do this. That way you guys can learn how to do it as well. So the first thing you will need is your scope. This here is a Vortex Strike Eagle. It's a 1:6 power optic for AR-15 platform rifles. And you're also going to need a scope mount. In this case, I'm using the Vortex cantilever mount for 30mm scope rings. One other thing that you will need is a torque wrench in inch pounds. Believe it or not, there are both foot pounds and inch pounds, and they are severely different. So you want to make sure that you are using the proper torque specs for each part that you are screwing down. I recommend the Wheeler Fat Wrench. It's about $45. Comes with a few standard size bits, and it's an inch pound torque wrench. I have used this in multiple things, ranging from 1911s, scope mounting, etc. It works for just a crazy amount of stuff. One other thing that you may or may not need, it's up to you, is Loctite. Blue Loctite. Do not use red. We're dealing with really small threads on really small screws, so you do not want to have it cemented in there with red Loctite. At most, just use a tiny dribble of blue and you'll be good to go. So we went over all the things that you will need, so I'm going to go ahead and dive right in and show you the whole process here. It's very easy to do, but it's a little time consuming, so obviously you're going to see me speed up a few parts of this. So, stick with me. Alright, so the first thing you want to do is you want to take the screws and the top moons out of your scope mount here. So once we get that cleared up, then we can go ahead and start the whole process here. The next thing I do is I place the mount on the upper receiver as far forward as I can without crossing the threshold to the handguard. Remember, never cross that threshold to the handguard, so keep the base of the mount completely on the upper receiver itself. So I like to find my spot there. Then I like to take the optic, place it in these rings, and just verify how much movement front and back I have. Because what you're going to have to do eventually is check your eye relief, and that is getting the perfect crystal clear image through your scope without having that black vignette around it. So it seems like I have enough movement here that I can adjust my eye relief. So I'm going to go ahead, remove that out, and I'm going to tighten down the mount itself. Now, there are torque specs with these scope mounts. The Vortex cantilever mount, as it says here, says your base screws need to be tightened down to 20 inch pounds. Now, at this point, you can apply Loctite if you would like to. You would take the screws out, apply your Loctite, then torque them into spec. So I'm going to take my Wheeler Fat Wrench here, and I'm going to turn it up to 20 foot-pounds. Inch-pounds, I mean. So we're at 20 inch-pounds. Remember, it's not much, but it's all you need. Now these screws are out of the camera sight, but what I do is I tighten them down back and forth. Start in the front, I move to the back, I go to the front. There's 4 screws here. I go to the back. Just do a staggered pattern. Don't tighten the front all the way down and then tighten the back all the way down. You won't get an even tightness there. Now one thing you want to do is pull the mount and push the mount forward as much as you can. As you can see here, it won't go forward anymore. You want it to be set forward. That way all of the recoil is supported. I'm going to go ahead and keep tightening them down. You don't want to torque them all at once. You want to just keep doing it gently. Get a nice even tightness here. That one broke. That one broke. That one broke. That one broke. So 20 inch pounds is not very much. Remember, do not over tighten this. These screws are small and they have tiny threads. You can ruin it in no time. So I put the scope down in the rings and I go ahead and I put the top halves on here. What I'm going to do is put the screws in here barely tight. That way I can still move the optic around. Because remember, I have to find my eye relief, then I have to level the scope itself. So I'm going to go ahead and just start installing these here screws. Okay, so as you can see, the rings are on, but the scope can still move. Remember, that's very important. You don't want it too tight, because then you're going to scratch your scope and then you can't adjust your eye relief and get your proper setting. Now, adjusting your eye relief consists of you getting behind the rifle in a normal shooting position and finding the point of the scope, or finding the distance from your eye, whether you move the scope back or forth, that you can see the clearest picture. So you're going to have to get in your normal shooting position. So if you usually shoot bipoded, go ahead and bipod up. If not, get behind the rifle however you shoot and move the scope back and forth until you get the clearest view possible. Once you do, take some masking tape, tape off a spot, that way you know exactly where it goes. Alright, so as you can see, I placed a piece of tape here marking my eye relief. So that is the point in the scope where I get the clearest picture. If I move it back more, it's not as clear. If I move it forward even more, it's even worse. So that spot means that you put that line of that tape directly on the ring itself, and that is your eye relief. The next step is probably the most complicated, I guess, but you will need a special tool. Now this tool isn't entirely necessary, but it's cheap and easy to use. And it's a scope leveling kit by Wheeler once again. Basically, this is a magnetic piece here with a bubble level. Then you have a non-magnetic, just random bubble that you put right there. What this does is it helps level the balance of your rifle to the scope. So you want your scope to be completely level with the rifle. Alright, so your first step is you take this one with the flat spot, and that goes on the receiver itself. Remember, make sure to put it on the receiver. Now unfortunately this is aluminum, so it's not going to actually magnetize to it, but you can just hold it flat to get a kind of general idea of where you're at. So if I hold this flat, I can see that the bubble actually isn't level, and that's because of my bench block here isn't holding it perfectly. So there's a few things you can do. You can shim your vice block to hold your rifle at a different angle, or you can just balance that bubble the same as this. So you can just match up this turret bubble to exactly the place that this bubble is at. Either way will work. For this time, I'm going to go ahead and match the turret bubble to this current bubble. And what you do is you have this level on the top turret of your optic, and you go ahead and just turn it and balance it until they completely match. It's very tedious. Find that eye relief spot and just move it until they match. Alright, so right there is about exactly the same. So we can go ahead and take these levels off. Now you want to make sure that your eye relief is in the right spot, and you're going to slowly start to tighten these down. Now, this is also a time that you can remove these screws and apply Loctite. I'm not going to do that. Now watch the optic, because as you tighten these down, the optic might start to tilt. So also, something to take note of, as you tighten these down, make sure that you are leaving equal space between each gap here. You want to make sure that this one has the same space as the opposing side, and that that space is the same as the opposing side. That's very important. You want to make sure that you apply proper pressure down across the entire scope and not just on one side of it. Alright, so I have the scope somewhat tightened down. I have the spaces between each ring gap here pretty much dead even. I'm going to go ahead and remove the level. I don't need it anymore. The next step is to do the final tighten down on this. Now, Vortex says that these ring screws need to be at 16 inch-pounds. So take your Wheeler torque wrench, bring it down. I go to about 15 just to be safe. No reason to have it over tight. You don't need it. And if you Loctite it, you especially don't need it. Once again, do that for pattern. You want to make sure that you're tightening these down completely even. But first, we're going to pre-snug them before we apply the final torque. So they're pre-snugged up, and now I'm going to do the final torque. Final torque is done. Take a gander. Verify that the spacings on each side is in fact even and ready to go. Looks pretty good to me. I'm going to call that good. And that is it. So there you have it, guys. That is a proper way to mount a scope on an AR platform rifle. Once you have it all torqued down and everything is done, go ahead, pull that tape off because you are finished. And now you can go to the range and zero. Remember, if you're mounting a scope like this, usually it needs to be zeroed at 100 yards. If it's a variable power optic like this 1:6 Vortex, you need to crank it all the way up to 6 power before you zero it. So it needs to be zeroed at 100 yards at the maximum power. Then dial it back down to 1 and you can use it basically as a red dot and as a sniper scope, so to speak. And that's it. It seems a lot harder than it is. It's really tedious and it takes some time, but I really did that fairly quick. Your first time might take you a little bit longer. All you need is a Wheeler torque wrench or any type of torque wrench that reads in inch pounds. You need your scope leveling kit, also from Wheeler, and you need a scope and rings. I prefer a single piece mount. The dual rings to me are only good for bolt guns that kind of have a space between your ejection chamber and the rail on the top. So go ahead and get a one-piece mount. It makes it much easier, especially when it comes down to torquing the mount onto the actual rifle itself. Other than that, that is really it. You can do it all with about $50 worth of tools, $50 or $60 worth of tools. And once you buy the tools, you have them forever. So that's it. That's a Vortex Strike Eagle 1:6 mounted in the Vortex cantilever 2-inch offset 30mm ring size mount. Stay tuned. I'm going to be reviewing a few optics, and this actually is one of them.